You're amazingly still. I always notice that about people breathing or moving. Are you holding your breath?
I need
Very
to do
still.
this until I have to take a breath, and then I'm just like, fine.
Yeah. Way out there, and cut. And that will take us into Tuesday.
Matt's saying he's, you know, breathing and stuff, but it's maybe. Fuck, it's terrible. You got dust in your eyes. It must be tough. And he's
Ray, go! Get to the med bay.
Casting was actually quite difficult because coming from District 9 and this place of like wanting to be somewhat outside of the Hollywood system and be a little bit more, you know, just my own sort of maverick guy, I was quite averse to kind of meeting with and engaging with very well-known Hollywood personas. I wrestled with that for a while. The idea behind the film is quite big and the imagery is quite big, and there was a certain point that I just realized that if you actually were to have stars that were recognizable in it, it may actually work in a positive sense and sort of elevate the entire film. When I crossed that mental threshold, I started to meet with people, and I was very sort of decisive about who those people would be.
Neil has a very specific way of casting on a film. Of course, he's looking for good actors, but his main goal, I think, is to make sure that the actors that he hires are down-to-earth, everyday people who he can get along with on set.
I think the hardest role in the movie to cast, and it's the lead of the movie, is Max, because he has to be somebody that has done, and even in the context of the movie, does some morally ambiguous things, even somewhat reprehensible things, but you can't lose your rootability in the character. And also, part of the challenge with Max was finding an actor that could play drama and play action. Someone who was viable as an action hero, who could put on a Hulk suit and shoot a rifle and would feel legitimate, and also could play a lot of really heavy, dramatic, emotional scenes. And you know, Matt Damon is one of the only actors in the world that's done both those things.
Well, I saw District 9 like everybody, and I freaked out like everybody else did. And so he instantly jumped to the top of the list of people that I wanted to work with. And I didn't know, I didn't even hope for it to happen as quickly as it did, but it turned out to be his next movie.
When I met Matt for the first time, I instantly liked him. You know, I met him in New York and we kind of just hung out for a bit.
I was already gonna beg my way into the movie, I was sure, once I was told I could meet him for a coffee. But he pulled out basically a graphic novel that he had designed himself, and he started to explain this world to me. As I was sitting in this diner with this young guy from South Africa, I go, oh my God, he built the world already. It's completely designed, it exists. We just have to go help him literally just bring it to life. That's it, it's already there.
I felt like he was someone that I would want to be around on set. There was no kind of ego and no bullshit. It was just about making the film. And that made me feel pretty good, because I thought maybe it was actually possible that, you know, you could go about doing this in a way that was the good version of very talented, well-known actors. And then Jodie Foster was the same thing.
I'd seen District 9 and loved, you know, what Neil did with that movie, and loved some of the things that were similar, about, you know, talking about sociopolitical questions under the heading of a genre sci-fi film.
When Neil and I started talking about who the villain of the movie was going to be, it was really important to him that it was somebody who was viable as an authoritative figure and scary and legitimate at being a villain, but somebody who was also empathetic to the audience and felt like a real three-dimensional human being. And Jodie is someone who's played drama and won Oscars and been nominated for more, but also has had a gun in her hand and has run around and been in thrillers and action movies. And so, like Matt Damon, she felt like she could fit into a film that was combining these different elements and different voices.
I love films that are set in the future, but of course are still dealing with the resonance of all of the political turmoil and the sociological turmoil that we're going through right now. This idea that in the future, the richer have become richer and the poorer have become poorer, and that extends to everything from who gets to be healthy to who gets to have children, who gets to have family, and who gets to escape our poisoned environment. And that this chasm between the rich and the poor is so enormous that in some ways it's created two different planets.
For Kruger, Neil obviously had a really close relationship with Charlto Copley that he worked with on District 9 and has been a childhood and lifelong friend of his. And this is a totally different part than Vicus from District 9, but manic and improvisational and surprising in similar ways.
What happened was he knew I was writing Elysium, and he kept asking me to read it. And What I felt like I wanted to do was I felt like I specifically did not want to make a film with him directly after making District 9. I just thought, like, he can go and work with multiple other directors, but, you know, it takes me 3 years to do a film. So every time I come up with a film, he's in it, but he's bounced around and I haven't. So I was like, I told him that I probably wouldn't be able to use him on this, and he was, you know, he was not happy. And so I sent him the script just to kind of let him see what I was thinking of making.
When I first read the script, I felt quite attracted to the idea of playing the villain.
When he read the villain, he phoned me instantly and started sort of begging to play that role, and really was just like on my case about it, like every day. And subconsciously, I knew before I even sent him the script, it was probably going to be him, because I could just see him in this crazy mercenary role.
What interested me about him as a villain, or the opportunity that I would have to play him, was to try to play him with a little bit more color. You know, the genre of this film, it doesn't take itself absolutely seriously. Although, yes, he's dark and he's evil and all of that, I wanted him to be a little bit charismatic and a little bit entertaining and a little bit fun to watch.
No, I think no.
No, give it to him. He should drink it. He's tough.
He just finds a way to make things funny. Even in the most extreme, dire situations, there's this kind of natural, sardonic kind of humor that seems to come out of him. And he never, ever plays it straight, ever. There's no circumstance ever. I don't even know how you could get him to play something straight. Right, even there, or even a foot back from there.
How come he gets the back leg?
It's the opposite.
No, they just want your face in shadow. It's like the McGee.
You see this?
And there you go.
It's hurtful, you know? Because I just admired him and like...
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's not what he seems like on screen, dude. He's a nice guy on screen.
You know, obviously he's the biggest star, he's faster, he's quick-witted. He's Matt Damon, you know, and sort of every chance he gets, I don't think he does it maliciously, but he you know, he'll sort of rub it in my face. The other day, I mean, EPK crew's there, you know, I made a little mistake where I wasn't on camera during my scene. He's pointing it out in front of the whole crew's laughing at me, you know, it's only my 3rd film, he's done like 50 movies. Honestly, bro, I mean, you know that scene in Good Will Hunting where he goes, "How do you like them apples?" And he shoves the girls, you know, shows that he got the girl's number, that he's the guy. That's kind of how it's been for me, you know, in this movie. It's just, he's Matt Damon. That was it. That was "How do you like them apples?" to me. No! You know, honestly, it's been good to be able to chase him and sort of beat him up every now and then. It feels good, you know, when he has to cower in the sand and he can't see and I'm, you know, kicking him around a bit. And I think this is just showing that other side of Matt Damon, and I'm having to sort of just bring it in line a little bit. And I think that works. That chemistry works. No, Matt's awesome, man. Matt is, honestly, I know, because actors always talk about this, but if I could choose people to add to my family, Matt would be on my list. It's been an incredible experience working with him, and I think he's a very smart guy, and what I've really enjoyed with him is a lot of like intellectual conversations. And he loves film and he loves acting.
What he's saying though is that when we cut back, we see you there,
obscenely close to me. You're like this.
It's like, okay, yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah.
That
so
is
like,
cool.
I never saw you coming, and you're here.
Yeah. It could be that. It just could be that. Okay, so you're talking this.
You know, Matt's the perfect person to play him for multiple reasons, but I like the idea of potentially how shocking this version of LA is. And having him wake up in a shack that's, you know, I guess overlooking the Hollywood Hills, and then walking by chickens down a hill, you know, it's just, it's hopefully, if I'd done it right, it's kind of quite shocking if you put Los Angeles over that. So what reinforces that and what makes that better is to take someone who is a movie star and to put them in that setting. Okay, and Ashley.
Back the fuck up.
How'd you like them apples?
Sorry, I had to get one.
I think I shit myself.
Jodie's dying on screen. I guess I didn't know this until we got fairly far into the film, that she told me that she hadn't ever died on screen. And I thought that was kind of like, so almost like an honor in a way, that, like, you know, Jodie Foster was dying in a film that I was directing. But then what became like mildly disturbing about it was that she was going to die at the hands of Charlto. I don't know if I could pick my death. I don't know if it would be Shaw. You know, he's a dodgy character to die at the hands of.
Yeah, I am the first person in the cinema history to kill Jodie Foster, which is, you know, is saying something. Killing Jodie Foster was actually one of the hardest scenes for me to do, because I have to stab her in the neck. And they gave me a sort of piece of plexiglass with a bit of green tape over it. But there's no like padding on the front of the glass, and it was like, okay, now you stab her in the neck. So the whole bunch of first takes that I'm doing, I'm trying not to hit Jodie Foster in the throat. And and I keep doing this, but I'm stopping too far away from her throat. And Neil comes in and he's like, dude, listen, you've got to actually make contact with the throat, because we're going to put a CG blade on the front, and it's got to look like it's gone into her neck. So you've got to actually go all the way to her neck.
The main problem with that one was your proximity for the stab was just not close enough.
Not close enough. And I mean, I hardly knew her. It was kind of like, hi, Jodie, I'm Charlto, how's it? Okay, and I'm going to stab you in the neck, you know, at this point. So I must have done it like 15, 20 times where I just kept chickening out, you know, to go too close. And then eventually I realized I could go slower and actually make contact, and it still worked. And then I asked Jodie what she thought. I tried to like score some points. I'm like, Jodie, I'm the first person to kill you on camera.
You look good, yeah.
Did I kill you successfully?
This is the best killing I've ever had. But mind you, I've never been killed before in a film, so.
Well, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Take it as a compliment.
And she dies incredibly, by the way. When she stops breathing, it's a very simple thing. As an actor, you'd think, I mean, as a child, you act like you're dying, you know, and then you die. So you think it's pretty basic, pretty straightforward. She's lying there, she stops breathing, and we're watching the rushes. And I thought they'd frozen the image. I'm looking at this, and I'm like, what is she doing? How is she keeping so still? It was very freaky. She really looked like she died. I know this sounds very weird.
I usually kill everyone else.
Yeah, I've never died on screen before. I don't know why. I've killed a lot of people, but for some reason I never die on screen. It was fun, really. I think fun to die at the hands of Charlto, the madman, Kruger. The blood's kind of fun. It stains everything you're wearing and it turns it pink. I think my kids are going to get a big kick out of seeing me with blood everywhere.
Try to grab it, like you can feel what he's holding on to, right? There's a few different ways you can play.
Having known Neil for so many years, it's amazing to see a lot of his earliest work, his earliest influences, his earliest design kind of work in this film.
You sit with him and he starts to talk about it, and you just go, I want in. Just what do I have to do to be involved with this? And the experience of making it, like, we would be looking at each other on the set, the actors and the crew members, and go, can you believe we get to do this? Like, this is incredible.
Elysium is pure science fiction. The satirical nature of Elysium is my favorite part of the film, which is the idea of putting exorbitant, ridiculous mansions on a space station. The way that it reinforces the theme, when you take that realistic scientific concept and then you cake it with wealth and diamonds, it becomes something I want to make a film about. In the 1970s, NASA held this conference to try to come up with the most viable way to habitat humans in space. What is the most habitable, realistically buildable thing you can build in space to move a portion of humans off Earth? And so in the 70s, Stanford University won out the design for that concept and came up with the idea for this thing called the Stanford Torus. There's this kind of cool thing that, you know, now that I'm a functioning filmmaker, I kind of realize that if I want to, I can actually work with some of the people that were really inspirational to me when I was young. And Sid Mead was absolutely one of those people.
I'd done inverse perspective environments for a long, long time, and in fact, one of Neil's favorite paintings of mine I'd done for National Geographic a long time ago. And it showed this inverse world with the terrain curving up essentially out of sight.
Even if he had not drawn the National Geographic image of the space station, I would be there anyway. But when you combine the image of the space station with that love of his design work, it's like a no-brainer. The second I realized that, I was like, we should try to get Sid Mead to do the design of Elysium.
Well, the process working with Neil on some of the sets was that I would do a sketch, just 8.5 by 11 typewriter paper. That's how I start, because ideas have no scale until you assign scale to them. So the idea is very critical, and I would do a fairly quick pen sketch, email that to him.
A lot of the time you could get concept artists that have only ever sort of been sketching in Photoshop, you know, with a Wacom tablet, and haven't ever handled like physical mechanical objects. There's something about Sid and his age and his experience and the fact that, you know, he's hand drawing it with ink on paper, that it's just, his brain is just working differently, you know, and the work that comes back reflects that kind of different algorithm, and it's very, very refreshing.
Sid was very involved in designing a lot of the imagery and the sort of baseline aesthetic for Elysium. Concept art, concept drawings, small things like the exhaust pipes to large things like what the actual Taurus would look like. And all through that, Phil Ivey, who's our production designer, was working in concert with him.
Neil and I have been Sid Mead fans forever. His work on Blade Runner, through Tron, everything else is, from a design standpoint, is gold. You'll see Sid's main contribution is in the overall geometry of the control room and the briefing room, and they're two of my favorite sets in the film.
And on Elysium, there were sets that Sid didn't get to that Phil would design. And, you know, he would use a lot of Sid's angles, and they all felt like they belonged to the same family. And he would also take Sid's concepts and then extrapolate them into sets. Like one example of a set that was Sid was the CCB, where Phil just, you know, turned that into reality.
The way I did it was to do a sketch, you know, face on, and sort of this and make the ramp system sort of radiate out from a center point. And the hierarchical arrangement was people doing sort of mundane response. We were down lower and the managers are higher up, which is sort of a graphical interpretation of hierarchical design.
And then there'd be other sets where Sid hadn't touched them. Phil would kind of think through Sid's eyes and bring those to life. And then on Earth, it would just be Phil and I.
Sid Mead's designs formed a basis and an influence of what Neil and the art department and Win Visual Effects were imagining the ring would be. A lot of his work also informed some of the finer details, just the shapes and patterns of the paneling, like on these enormous space station.
His particular way of angles that he uses, his lines, his offsetting of colors and patterns. So we created basically a Sid Mead style guide. So we collected all of that information that we love about Sid Mead and looked at his old drawings and sketches over the years. And we're really inspired by that, and then applied that same mentality and thinking in designing things like the ring or Elysium itself.
We had to imbue Sid's, you know, beautiful, elegant designs of Elysium with a practical, workable mentality, trying to bring a sense of reality to these very sci-fi images. So we looked at things like the Yangtze River Dam project, where you see construction on a massive scale. We looked at all kinds of superstructures, bridges, skyscrapers, transoms of all kinds of sorts, to try to bring a sense of what engineering in today's world can accomplish, that the audience subconsciously understands that this structure could exist. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges, trying to convert very science fiction images into something that the audience will accept and believe is possible.
The rules when you're doing a future, first you have to find out what the technological parameters are. What does this society know how to do? How does this fit into maybe some sort of a socioeconomic format? That's critical, and of course that's the story. If the story is well written, that's how the story is set. That's the stage. So I did this cross section to get the scale. If it's this far from here to here, then a house is that big, or streets, or whatever.
Sid's ideas often would go to speculative fiction and to making it, like, just building it correctly. And then I would steer it back to more metaphor. Like, I'd be like, no, it's actual mansions on space. Because you could imagine building a space station like that and building, like, these super high-tech, like, hexagonal living areas, you know, that... And that's appealing. Like, a lot of the time I would see that and I would start thinking in that direction. But the second I feel like you do that, you take away the metaphor.
He said, this is supposed to be Beverly Hills in space. Think about making it a little bit more pastoral. So he sent me aerial shots of Beverly Hills, and he said, sort of scale it to this, you know, with the streets and the mansions. So I found out how big a tennis court is, regulation tennis court, and started to scale these mansions, how big they were, in the shot that Neil sent me. And that gave me a clue, because now I could match it up to my scale across the breadth of the rotational torus.
And so that was the thing with Sid, where he would bring ultra-real JPL aerospace ideas, and I would bring metaphor. We would kind of clash with one another and then figure out this kind of middle ground.
My strong suit, I guess, is that having an industrial design background, I can theoretically imagine how this might be made given a series of theoretical possibilities of manufacture. Because if you know the process anyway in the real world, then you move ahead and say, okay, now we can make things in one piece that are a mile long or whatever it happens to be. And that influences how it looks, because things look the way they do because of how they're made.
When Neil talks about Elysium, he doesn't talk about it as a science fiction imaginary world. He talks about it as Bel Air in space. And so all of the models for Elysium were not futuristic, futurist theory. It was, what is Bel Air? What are the most expensive, most garish homes and buildings in the world look like?
If you imagine trying to transplant Hollywood Hills into space on a much grander canvas, then that's sort of what we're trying to achieve.
And we shot plates for Elysium of Bel Air, Beverly Hills, a lot of places in Los Angeles that if you live in Los Angeles, or certainly if you live in those areas, you'll recognize.
And how would that work when you wrap it on the inside of this torus? And things like how high are the mountains, and how prominent are the bodies of water, and is it all sparse mansions, or are they clustered in communities, and how much public buildings and sort of city areas, and is there any visible public transport?
We went around a few times on how light, how bright, how dark, how sci-fi is too sci-fi and how real is too real. And so you're constantly finding that balance between something that people aren't being disturbed by, but people are wowed by.
There's all these questions that start coming up as soon as you really dig into what is that shot going to look like when the camera is low enough to the surface to really get a feel for what that geography looks like.
We have a whole mix of mansions through there. One thing we're saying is money doesn't necessarily buy taste. So we have a lot of your faux Tuscan mansions through to your Malibu modern, which is a style I really like, through to your ultra modern mansions that you're seeing now, mainly in concept stuff, but are starting to be realized as construction techniques have progressed. So we have a whole raft of architectural styles there. But there, there is a base style to the whole thing. There is an architectural plan, but within it, there are pockets of different styles of architecture that you would see on Earth.
We didn't necessarily make up too many sci-fi elements. Neil definitely wanted a level of realism in that environment that people wouldn't question.
But what I enjoyed most working on Elysium was working with Neil, not just in making movies, but in the art of design and the techniques that he uses, and the trust that he was putting in me to sort of invent, to a certain extent, how his film would look.
The challenge of building Elysium as an environment and as a believable space was the thing that we were the least knowledgeable about at the start of the process, and the thing that we had to become the most knowledgeable about by the time we completed it.
Usually in science fiction, you have one or the other. It's dystopic or it's utopic. And with Neil, you get both, and they're warring with each other the way that they are in the real world right now. So Elysium was this sort of pure expression of the suburbs and the excess.
This realistic concept of the Stanford Torus, a functioning space station that is a self-contained biosphere, that's what I was interested in, was something that was like that, but then again the metaphor kicks in and it's a little bit bigger and it's a little bit more lavish and a little bit more ridiculous, but it's based on something that is sort of realistic.